So welcome to the Sailchart Introduction. So to start off with, what is Sailchart? Essentially, there's two parts to it. One is an app which runs on your phone, and the main purpose of the app is to collect data whilst you're sailing. There is a race playback feature in the app for if you want to have a quick look, but most of the analysis and playback is done through what we call the dashboard, which is website based. And on the dashboard there's a playback feature. There's various bits of race analysis which we'll go through, some boat performance, and it's also the app where you amend your account and boat details. So there's some admin type stuff on the website as well. So why track? Why are we bothering doing this? We're picking up on Mike's point in the introduction to the Yawl magazine. So the theme this season is focusing on personal performance. So we all know sailing's supposed to be fun. But does anyone know how sailors spell fun? W-I-N. So most of us are looking to improve, and for me at least, a large part of the enjoyment of sailing is the challenge of improving. So not just going out there and winning every time, which would be nice, but actually, I mean, at least for me, a large part of the enjoyment that I get out of sailing is the challenge of trying to improve. And one aspect to that is learning from your mistakes, and I felt that having access to some post-race data that tells you where you lost your time, where you went wrong, that would be an aid, one of many other aids, of course, like talking to people about your rig and all the rest of it. So the app isn't going to make you a better sailor, but the idea with the app is it's going to help you answer certain questions that you may have, like, am I losing time throughout the race or just in the first beat? What's the difference between my beat performance versus my run performance? And so you can get some of these insights. It may not tell you how to improve your start, but it may tell you what your tracks were in the pre-start, and just give you some tips after the race to say, well, actually, if I can do that better, then I'll hopefully improve my position. So really, I think the key to getting something out of this is the sort of questions that you ask it. So thinking about where can I make improvements, what questions can I ask, and can I get any answers or at least ideas about where I can make improvements, and then go out and try and figure out how you're going to solve that. And that's probably, the app's not going to tell you how to solve it, but talking to people with specific themes in mind might help. So it's not a silver bullet by any means. It's just another tool to help us hopefully get some more enjoyment and performance out of our sailing. Okay, so what data is captured? So the Sailchart records your position, your speed over ground, your course over ground at 1 hertz. So for those of you who remember your schoolboy physics, 1 hertz is basically 1 data point per second. In addition to what we were using last year, eStellar, the app is capable of recording 2 additional pieces of information. One is your heel angle, and the other is your heading. And that will require the phone to be positioned level and facing forwards in the boat, obviously to get the heel angle and the heading. And we'll talk about why we're recording heel angle, and specifically why are we bothering recording heading when we've got a course over ground. We'll talk about that, a bit about that later. And then I just wanted to mention a caveat on the data accuracy. If you look at the America's Cup or Sail GP and all of the data that they capture in those races and present back, they've got a level of accuracy probably at least an order of magnitude better than the data the phone's going to give you. So the GPS accuracy in the phone is typically accurate to, they say 1 to 3 meters. It's probably often accurate to a meter or so, but not much less than that. So when the phone tells you you're sailing on top of someone else, that's probably GPS accuracy rather than the fact that you've collided. It also means that there's no point in trying to use the phone tracking for protests or anything like that. It's just not accurate enough. So individual data points might not be totally accurate, but over the course of a race, it's going to give you a pretty good idea. Occasionally, you may see some rogue data. For example, if the phone doesn't capture the data for 10 seconds and then suddenly gets it again, that position is going to jump maybe 20 meters in 1 second, and it's going to think you went really, really fast. So obviously there's going to be cases where the data looks really odd, and it's probably for that sort of reason. So just look at the data with a degree of skepticism, but broadly for what we're trying to achieve, it should be accurate enough. Okay, so from the data that's been recorded, we then derive various other bits of information. That's speed made good, your leg efficiency, and some tack data. I think probably everyone on this meeting will know what VMG is. Just very quickly, it's the component of your speed in the direction of the wind. So unless you're Dan being able to sail directly into the wind, you're always having to sail at an angle to the wind. So in this case, if I'm sailing at 6 knots at an angle of 40 degrees to the wind, my VMG is 4.6 knots. And if I'm sailing 60 degrees to the wind, my VMG is 3 knots. And that's VMG is the velocity towards where you want to go, upwind. Now, to measure VMG, you need to know the wind direction. And when we're sailing in a yawl, we don't know the wind direction. I mean, we hopefully we know the wind direction as the helm, but the app doesn't know what the wind direction is. And we don't have any instrumentation on board, unlike the America's Cup boats and the SailGP boats that'll give you wind. So instead of using the wind direction, what the app gives you is the speed made good. And often speed made good is used as a proxy for VMG. It's broadly the same as VMG, except instead of the component of your speed towards the wind, it's the component of your speed towards the next mark. Now, if you're on a beat, if the mark is dead upwind, then speed made good will be the same as VMG. But if the wind is at any sort of angle to the direction of the mark, then there will be a difference, especially when you get very close to the mark. So in this case, I'm sailing almost towards the mark, so I've got a very low angle away from where I want to go, 20 degrees. So my speed made good is very high, whereas here, if I'm close to the mark but sailing away from it, I've got a very low VMG. So the speed made good figures close to the mark are going to be affected by that, but when you're hundreds of meters away from the mark, it's giving you a pretty good idea of what component of your speed is made good. So that's just explaining speed made good as almost like VMG, but not quite. Efficiency is basically what distance did you sail compared with the shortest possible distance. So if the shortest possible distance between these two marks is 2,000 meters and you tacked up towards it sailing, say, 2,700 meters, then we're saying your efficiency on that leg was 74%. So it's a measure of how close you're sailing to the wind, or how efficient your sailing is. And it's actually quite interesting looking at the data from last season that's been loaded into Sailchart as how some of the people at the front of the fleet are sailing at much higher levels of efficiency than those of us at the back. So how do you measure efficiency and speed made good? So imagine we're going from 1 to 7. The shortest distance between them is going to be pretty impossible to sail for obvious reasons. So to just measure the shortest distance between 1 and 7 would be slightly misleading, because there's no way you could you could sail that. So what we do in designing the course, or at least the course as Sailchart knows it, is to introduce waypoints along the way. So we say, well, we can't go direct, but what we can do is go to there and go to there. So instead of having one leg, the race course within Sailchart would have two legs. One to what we'll call Bag South, and from Bag South to Severn. In Sailchart, this is actually, you'll notice it's a line, it's not a point. We call them a way line, not a way point. And the reason is that I didn't want the results to differ between someone who hugged Snape versus someone who hugged Scobell. So if one boat went up on the left and another one went up on the right, the one going on the left would have a shorter distance to the waypoint, whereas what I've done is treating it a bit like a start or finish line, that you finish that leg when you cross that line. So whether you cross it at Snape's or cross at Scobell makes no difference in terms of, so there's no gaming of the waypoint, and you don't have to worry too much about where you place the waypoint. You just angle the line, which is going to give you a roughly accurate first and second leg. So that's
does the app put that waypoint in automatically?
No. At the end of the race administrator has to say what the course is. So it says the course was 1313 whatever, and put in the waypoints. But they're already predefined. So you just drag I've got predefined waypoints for ditch end and for the bag, for there and for there. And I've also got one along here for if you have to go 7 to 5. Or 7 to 6 via 5 and all that sort of stuff. So they already pre-exist, and then you just drag and drop them from a library of available way lines into the race course. But that's something that the race administrator does at the end of the race when we know what the course was.
Okay.
And then all of the calculations that you'll see are done per leg. So there would be one set of data for that leg and another set of data for that leg. And then the final thing is tacking. What Sailchart does is it tells you what your how many tacks you made, what your average tack angle is, and what your speed loss, or in the case of aggressive pumping, your speed gained over the tack is. And it's configured. So I've configured it that a course change of more than 65 degrees equals a tack. Who can tack at 65 degrees, you may ask? Well, if the tide's going with you, then the actual course over ground, because you'll be being swept down with the tide, or if there's a massive shift, sometimes you do get tack angles that are quite low compared with your typical 90-degree tack. So I had to set a parameter somewhere, and I chose 65 degrees. Now, these points are supposed to indicate the fact that they're not smooth and uniform. There's a bit of jiggling around. And so the way it works out a tack, if you're interested, is it takes a bearing, for an average bearing, and for one set of data points and for another. And then if the angle change, allowing 4 seconds for a tack, if the angle change is greater than 65 degrees, in this case, let's pretend it's 85 degrees roughly, then that's a tack. It measures the average speed before the tack, the average speed after the tack. Oops. So that gives you a speed loss of 1 knot over that tack. So to start Sailchart, you would log in. Sailchart is designed to allow you to sail at multiple clubs. So those of you who sail at different places, you can use it in different clubs, and it knows that I'm nearer to my test club, which is here, than Salcombe, but I'm going to stick with Salcombe. So when you signed in, you can see the club you're sailing, the boat you're sailing. For the Chris's of this world with 2 boats, you can choose which boat you're sailing that day, whether it's Y68 or Battle Cry. For those of us with just the 1 boat, then obviously that's the one we choose. And then normally what you'll do is participate in an organized race, which will be today's race. So the race I've got running today is called Introduction, but obviously it will have a more meaningful name like Blue Yawl's Race Regatta Race 1 or Open Meeting Race 1, whatever. And then when you're ready to start, the one thing to choose is whether you want to use the phone sensors for your boat heading and heel or not. So what you can see here is if I tilt my phone, you'll see the heel angle changing. You can't see me, well, yeah, tilting my phone. There's the heel angle and the phone's roughly level. And similarly, if I move my phone around, it's got the heading. So if you don't want to bother with this, you just turn it off. But if you want to record heading and heel, then essentially when you start, you need to put your phone facing forward level. So in a dry bag attached with a bit of Velcro to the floor or to the thwart, facing forwards, and then heel and heading will be recorded. And then when you're ready, you press start and you're off. It's tracking. So it'll just tell you club, boat, race, what your compass heading is, and it grabs off a website, it grabs the high tide and low tide values and times. So rather than having to look somewhere else to remember what the tide is, it'll just remind you what the tide is for that day at the club, so at Salcombe. So whilst it's tracking, the icon at the top is red, just to tell you it's tracking. So you can switch off turn off your screen, put the phone in a bag. If you're using the heading and heel function, have it level facing forwards. Otherwise, just chuck it in a dry bag and forget about it. And then at the end of the race, just press pause. If you've pressed pause by mistake, you can press resume. Otherwise, stop and save, and it's done. And then you're in the races page where you can see that race and previous races, and you can play them. It just downloads the data, and then you've got a race player, which you can press play and zoom in, speed up, and play the race. So pretty much like Estella. So that's the app. I'm not going to talk too much more about the app because there's a lot more to cover. So the rest of it is done on the website. So with the website, you won't see all of these options unless you're an administrator, but you'll see the first few options. The main one is handled through races. So in races, if we pick, for example, Regatta Blue Race 1, there are two main options. One is the race viewer, and the second is race analysis. So the race viewer is where you would go to play back the race. So again, there's a bit of download from our server onto your browser. Gives a nice bit of time to show the sponsor's logo.
I was saying you can actually have the satellite picture as well if you want.
Yeah, so basically most of it's a map. You can choose satellite and get rid of the labels, or you can choose map. And then you press play. It starts 5 minutes before the start, but just to warn you that the Estella data that was transferred across, they only gave us the data from the start of the race. So all the pre-start's missing from the Estella data. for this year's races with Sailchart, all the pre-start will be there, but we've lost all the pre-start in the transfer across from eStella to Sailchart. So I'll just move this along a bit. So here we all are sailing away. You can speed things up. You can pause. You can move it along a bit. Where have we gone? We're up here now. So that's basically playback. I'll just pause that. There's a few things just to show you. One, under options, you can choose which boats you want to display. And if you tick follow on a boat, then the map will remain centered on that boat. And if you've got a load of boats with the same color, you can even override the color to something else to help you distinguish them. So that just temporarily changes the color of a particular boat to make it easier to distinguish between two white boats. Not too bad with the yawls, but with the solos, you probably wouldn't want to use hull color for those. And also, if you've got heel angle, we don't have any heel data from eStella, but you can animate the heel angle. It'll give you a little transom showing you how much you're heeling the boat. Okay, and then the other thing is notes. You can see what the tide was for the race. So this particular race was high water at 10:40 in the morning. It's got all of the data. We've got a feed from the Wind Guru in the watch house. So all the wind data for the race is available. So you can see what the wind speed and gusts were throughout the race and the direction as well. And then this compass gives you a rough idea of the average wind direction for the race. And there's also somewhere where you can enter notes. So at the end of the race, if you want to note anything down about rig tuning changes you made, or the fact that you had to clear weed off your rudder 26 times, or any other excuses, you can note those down, and then just as an aid, so you don't, so weeks later thinking, well, why was I so slow there? And just if you put in your notes, or if you're experimenting with something, or if you're using a new set of sails, or changing your rig tension, whatever, you can put your own private notes in. No one else can see them. Put your notes in here and save them, and then they're available to look at later on when you look back at the race. So that's the race player. The other one here is the race analysis. So what I'm going to pick is this Regatta Blue Race 6. Bring up race analysis. So what we have is four main areas here. We've got somewhere where you can pick the boats that you want to look at. So I can look at, say, just comparing two boats, and I can see all of the tracks throughout all the legs over in the map. And if I just show the selected boats, then I can look at the different legs, and we can see how much better Mike was than Ollie in this particular race. So what you've got here is the individual legs, the distance they sailed, and the efficiency, the elapsed time, the average speed over ground, average speed made good, the maximum speed over ground, maximum speed made good, when that leg was completed, how many tacks were made, the average tacking angle, and you can see on the first leg, so 15 lost on average 0.6 of a knot in a tack, whereas 68 lost 0.3. And then the final one is heel, which we haven't got any heel data from Estella. So what you can look at those. You can bring in some additional boats. So if you want to see how much better you are than there, the best is in green for each leg, the worst in red. So you've got you can easily see if I bring in some other victims as well. We can start to look at comparisons. As you're looking for them, you can see the wind over the race is in here as well. You can bring up the notes page and look at that at any time and check what the tide was. In this case, high water was at 4. And in this chart down here, you can bring up various other bits of data. So I could chart speed made good, or chart speed over ground. Gets a bit meaningless when you look at the whole race, but a bit more meaningful when you look at particular legs. So if we just pick the first beat, what's interesting I find in this is I lost 10 minutes in this race overall, and what I noticed was 5 of those minutes was in the first beat. And this isn't the only race where the first beat has been pretty disastrous for me, whereas some of the other beats, so if we look at the second from 3 to 1, then actually comparing me with Mike, it was the same amount of time. So my problem wasn't raw lack of boat speed or total inability to sail on a beat. My problem was the first beat. So then you're thinking, well, is it a poor start? Is it that I'm sailing in dirty air the whole time? Is it that I'm taking a particularly poor course? Because when you look at the beats towards the end of the race, you tend to the fleet spread out. You're sailing your own beat, your own race, your own course, and without too much interference from anyone else. And you'll see here, there's not a lot of difference between these 5 boats in that second beat compared with the first beat. So that's just I found quite interesting. So what you can do if we got the first leg, you can play that leg. I'll just speed it up a bit. Why isn't it playing?
You have to push play.
I have to push play, that helps. Should just get going in a sec. Yeah. What you can do is also you can, with the right key combinations, you can rotate it. So I quite like having it facing upwind. And I'll just speed it up a bit. So just focusing on what I'm trying to learn out of this, it didn't start off too badly. Then it went all pear-shaped around here. I think the trouble with this is we need to get everyone tracking, because I reckon there was a lot of interference with starboard boats around then. Of course, we don't see all the other boats that aren't tracking. And I think the more people who track, the better this is. So just in that section there, it all just went horribly wrong on that first beat. And it looks like Y89 had a few turns to do there as well. So that's the first beat. If we take, let me just take a couple of boats on
Put 161 in as well, I think.
Well, I'm going to in a minute, actually.
Okay.
So So this one was attacking duel between 15 and 68 on the second beat. So we'll just go through this. We'll just go through this quite quickly. So off they go, and then if I just slow it down, and then it all, and then for some reason, whatever, you decided to go up there, and that really paid off for you. I think that, and then you just about got there. But obviously you were quite focused on each other throughout that beat. But if we bring in Andrew and play it again, you'll see Andrew's track is quite different. Now, unfortunately, here Andrew's started back there. He'd already lost a bit of time, so it's difficult to compare them. So what you can actually do here is, what I can say is, instead of playing this in real time, I'm going to play it what's called offset. An offset says what would it look like if they all started that leg at the same time. So you've got to bear in mind they're not sailing at the same time. It's offset, and they may be sailing in different wind. But if we bring the wind up on that second beat, we're at around 3 to 320, and the wind is dropping. The average wind was roughly consistent, so we can probably say they were broadly in the same wind for this leg. And what's interesting about this, if we look at them, so 161 did quite a bit better on that leg compared with 15 and 68. And I think what's happening here is that there's a bit of follow the leader, and you want to stay close to the person you're trying to beat. So that's why these guys went up here. But if we look at the tide, high water was a neap tide, 4.1 meter tide at 4 o'clock. So at 3:30, we're roughly in slack water. There's not a lot of tide going, which is why 161 did far better taking these long tacks up here, and rather than close tacking up the shore when there was not a lot of tide going.
Darius, can you look at the number of tacks I took?
Yeah.
Compared to 68.
Yeah. So this is this one. So yeah, you did 31 tacks compared with 17 for 68.
And 14 for 161.
Yeah. So almost twice as many tacks on that leg. Actually, you didn't seem to suffer too much from that.
No.
But certainly 68 does very well on tacking angle and not losing as much speed.
So the tacking angle for 68 was 91 degrees, whereas mine was
108. And for the whole race, 68's tacking angle was 89, whereas
105.
105 and 113, and losing the least speed.
It's dramatic, isn't it?
Yeah. So really, I was just trying to point out. I'm not really wanting to turn this into a sort of a what can we learn about this race session. It's more just showing features of Sailchart, the sort of data that's available, and then the sort of questions you might want to ask. For example, this one is, just following the leader doesn't always work. I mean, obviously, Andrew had some great insight, and actually, there's not a lot of tide here. We'll just go straight up the harbour.
There were two others in that race who went on the Portsmouth shore, and that was Dan and Martin Payne as well.
107.
Yeah, the 107 we've got a slight problem with because his phone seems to constantly lose signal.
Yeah.
So you'll find with 107 that we've got him at the start, and we've got him up to 3, and then basically his phone gave up, and all the tracking data was lost for the rest of that race. So when you see boats with nothing there, it's typically because the tracking data just never got recorded. Right, so that's the race analysis. So what you can do here is, just to summarize, all the different bits of data. You can choose which boats you want to compare. You can choose what you want to chart. So for example, I might want to chart speed made good. And on this one, you can choose whether you're charting elapsed time. In other words, here, you both started at the same time, you both roughly finished at the same time, whereas 161 started that leg 5 minutes later and finished it 3 minutes later, so actually gained 2 minutes on that leg. Or you can choose aligned time, so that's assuming you all started that leg at the same time. What does it look like? And here, because 161 actually sailed that leg quicker, you'll notice that on aligned time, 161 ends that leg a minute before the other two boats. Or you can look at distribution. So this is the distribution of speed made good. So what that's telling you here, for example, is Y15 was spent 20% of its time at 3.5 knots speed made good. So you're just looking at the profile of how much time were you sailing slow versus how much time were you sailing fast. And it tends to be like a distribution, certainly on the beats. On the runs, it's different, of course. On a run, it's a lot more even on the run. So that's just really the sort of data you got here. You can display all the boats or just the boats that you've selected. You can include cumulative values. So what we've got, when you say include cumulatives, you don't just have the distance, but you've got the cumulative distance and cumulative elapsed time for the race. Just, you know, I made it optional because otherwise there's just too much data there. One question I haven't answered, you haven't asked, but I've sort of alluded to, is why are we recording heading? What's the purpose of recording heading? And essentially, course over ground is the heading based on the movement of the boat. And the most dramatic example of that would be if you're sailing backwards, then your course over ground will look. Let's say I'm sailing backwards that way, but if my bow is pointing forwards, north, my heading will remain pointing north, even though I'll be pushing backwards. So if you're drifting backwards, course over ground will look like you're sailing in that direction, whereas heading it'll be more obvious that you're actually drifting backwards. So if the heading data is recorded, then when the boats are playing, when you're watching the boats playing, the boat angle so the boat here is orientated. If there was heading data, the orientation of this little icon will be according to your heading, not the course over ground. So if you were drifting backwards, then the boat would look like you were drifting backwards rather than look like you're sailing down there. Okay, so that's the analysis, and then the final bit to show you is just some summary charts where you can chart various bits of information like your tacking angles. And there's 4 bits of data here. There's the best in green, the worst in red, the average in yellow, and yourself, your boat, in blue. so you get an idea of over time how you're performing compared with other boats in speed made good, speed over ground, distance. So what percentage of distance? So the best boat sails at 100%, so we'll always be down here. And in this case, the worst boat was 117% of the distance of the best boat. So there's various bits of data here that you can chart and compare your performance. For single fleet, single class races, it's the same, but for club races, you can either choose to compare all boats in the race or just boats of the same class. So in a mixed red and blue fleet race, you could just compare yourself with other boats of your same class or against everyone. We're thinking about applying some handicapping to the data for the club racing, but haven't got around to thinking about how to use handicapping. So at the moment, all this data is raw data. There's no handicapping. And then just to finish off, in your account, you can, if you need to change your email or password, you can do that. And under My Boats, what you can do is if you share the boat with someone else, then you can add other people as either a co-owner of the boat or a user of the boat, and they can then track with that boat. The only difference between user and owner is an owner has ownership rights, so an owner could add other users, whereas a user can't amend the boat, but they can sail in the boat. So the only thing I'd say here is if you sell your boat to someone else, if you want to make them an owner first and then remove yourself, then that boat's data will remain. Whereas if you effectively delete the boat, then all of the historical data gets lost, and they could then add in the boat as if it was a new boat. So to preserve historical information, if you transfer the boat to someone else, add them in as an owner, and then you can remove yourself as an owner of that boat, and then the boat data persists. I think that's about it, really.
I think there are.
Still looking awake, just.
Well, Darius, I just want to say amazing and thank you. It's an incredible thing. I've obviously had a chance to use it ahead of other people, but I think it's an amazing development, and can I thank you and everyone in your team for the work in getting this to this stage. It's absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to using it, genuinely, so thank you.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah.
When you have the phone in the boat, is it important that it's on the center line, or can it be? Doesn't really matter, does it?
No, I don't think it does matter. As long as it's level and pointing forward. I mean, what I'm thinking of doing is having a dry bag with some two-sided Velcro, one side stuck to the bag and one wrapped around the thwart, and then I can just sort of Velcro the bag down onto the seat. The one thing
yeah, go on.
The one thing I haven't worked out yet, because I haven't had, there's been a lot of testing of this on dog walks, so my dog walking tacks are optimized, but I haven't actually been able to try this on a real boat yet. And the only thing I'm not sure about is whether I've got an iron shoe, so whether the iron shoe is going to affect the compass heading. If the phone is offset from the center line, I just need to try it out whether the iron is going to affect the compass of the phone or not. Otherwise, as long as it's level and pointing forward, it shouldn't matter where it is.
Okay. And are you thinking of having a watch remote to start and stop it?
A what, sorry?
A watch, using the watch. Like Estella had a watch remote.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't really thought of that yet. I haven't got an Apple Watch, so we could look into that. I mean, I'm sort of trying to limit the amount of extra development work we've got to do.
Okay, I get that. So if you start from the pontoon,
yeah,
your half an hour. Did you say all that data is now recorded?
Yeah.
And then,
Well, what it does, I'll just show you the race administration. So when you're just defining a race as a race administrator, you specify a tracking start and tracking end. So you can start the app whenever you want, but it won't actually start recording data until, or storing it until the tracking starts. And then once it reaches the tracking end, it'll stop recording that data. That's mainly so that we don't end up with our database being filled up with everyone's trip to the pub 5 hours after the race is ended. So you can start it on the pontoon, put it in your bag, and align.
then if we have a recall, what happens?
No, it'll carry on. No, basically, it's collect from the moment where was I? From the moment it starts. So typically, tracking start will be an hour before or half an hour before the nominal race start, and tracking end allowing plenty of time for the race to finish.
Okay.
Once the race is actually finished, someone like myself or Mike or whoever's administering needs to come in here. They need to set up the course. So they need to say, okay, this was a 1-3-1-3 finish. So that race would start 1-3-1-3 finish. They need to put in the actual start. So they'll work out from the tracks when you actually started. So this might start at 18:05, for example, and when it actually ended, which essentially is when the last boat finished crossed the finish line. So the actual end was at 19:10. So that's done after the race. So that when you're doing the race playback for a completed race, it will show you the playback for 5 minutes before the actual start until the actual end.
There's an interesting little point there. You see just under where your cursor was, it says allowed training sessions.
Yeah.
So I had to go out the room when you had the app on. Did you talk about the training
No,
session?
I didn't actually. It's probably a reasonable thing to do. So let me. Okay. So the idea with training sessions is when you go out and sail on your own. I don't know about you, but I find I'm the best sailor in the world at that point. And you've got no way of measuring yourself. You just, you're brilliant, but you're not comparing yourself against anything. So as well as organized races, you can set up two other types of races. One is a personal race. So if 2 of you or 3 of you want to go out on a Sunday for some 2-boat tuning or 3-boat tuning, you can create, one of you creates a personal race. And then with the personal race, you get a race code. In this case, it's VVLCCU. So if you then shout across or set it up beforehand, give that to other people, then one person sets it up, and then the rest of you can enter in that race code, and then you can set up your own little personal race and view the results like a normal club race, but it's just personal to whoever was in that personal race. So if you're doing some tuning exercises, that you can use Sailchart for that without needing the club to set up a race for you. And then if you're on your own, you can run what's called a training session. So if I start a training session, what you've got in the training session are various bits of information like your your heel angle, your speed. I'll just quickly move the phone, it might go up a bit. So let's move the phone around, might get a bit of speed. But you get your speed, you get how many tacks you've done, and your tacking angle, your course and heading. The other interesting one is your VMG or speed made good, and you can either do it where you basically if you want to do VMG, you sort of go head to wind or just stop the boat, point the phone in the direction of the wind, and press set course. So now, if I pointed the phone in the direction of the wind, so it knows that the wind is at 209 degrees, and then you just sail, and as you're sailing, it'll calculate your VMG to based on 209 degrees as your wind direction. Or what you can do is sit on the start line and you say select mark, and you say I want to sail to Mark 1. So now it knows the target mark is Mark 1, and you then sail to Mark 1, and it'll calculate your speed made good towards Mark 1. And then if I press averages, at the end of it, you can look at your averages. So over that leg, your average heel angle, your average speed, your average VMG, your tack angle, and your tack speed change. You can look at those averages, and then you can repeat it. Again, try a different sail setting or whatever, reset, press the reset button, and try again. So it's just you're out sailing, doing some tuning. It's a way of capturing some of the metrics while you're out sailing and looking at them. So if you want to focus, for example, on sailing flat, you could look at your heel angles. If you want to focus on speed made good, VMG, you can do that. So that's called training mode. And the only restriction on training mode is whilst there's a race running, so for example, this race doesn't allow training sessions, and normally club racing and regattas won't allow training sessions. So if you're within 10 kilometers of a race that's actively running, you can't use the training session. So you couldn't jump into the boat and use the VMG calculations whilst you're actually racing. It won't allow you to use Sailchart for training sessions whilst there's a club race actually in progress, even if you're not sailing in that club race.
It's actually also worth saying that the tracking for viewers on the app or the web page is actually quite delayed. So it's of no use to you while you're actually sailing. Whereas the training, because it's not transmitted anywhere, it's instantaneous, it's simultaneous to your sailing.
So, Darius, is there any data that is displayed live on the screen whilst you're racing? Would you be able to see your tacking angle, for example?
No. Whilst you're racing, if I just bring this back, I mean, the idea is that the phone's in. I mean, it may be in a dry bag with a window, so you might be able to look at it. Let me just show this thing again.
The delayed tracking images are at least 30 seconds delayed.
There's probably at least a minute, if not more, delay. So the actual looking at other boats, they're not going to be any use to you. You're far better eyes out of the boat looking at what's happening.
So, Darius,
yeah.
Echoing what David said, it's a great bit of tech. Thank you so much for building it. A couple of questions. Battery life for an iPhone, is it like to last, like when we've got 2 races in a day, will it last all of that, or we'll have to put another battery in?
Yeah, I'll just answer the question on what's displayed on the screen while you're racing. Essentially, what you see is this. So you would see a map, your compass heading, which isn't going to help you much, and the tide data. So there's nothing else available whilst you're racing. It's not designed to be an aid whilst racing. So asking the question about battery life, GPS is reasonably battery hungry. So whilst it's tracking, it's probably going to be broadly similar to the consumption of eStella. We've done what we can to minimize battery consumption, but yeah, I mean, I haven't noticed it particularly bad. During the race, it's optimized for the amount of data that it sends. So it sends the data to the server in batches, typically a batch of track points every 60 seconds. So if you lose mobile phone signal, it buffers it up and sends it when it gets the signal again. So you don't lose data if your phone loses phone signal. Uses about 500K of data for a race, so it's not particularly expensive in terms of data consumption. Yeah, I think battery, you know, if you've got a knackered old battery, it's going to suffer. But I've tracked it for an hour-and-a-half dog race and dog walk, and haven't really noticed it draining the battery particularly.
Thanks. And in terms of enhancements, Darius, are you thinking of making any over time, or is this done now for the moment, or what?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I'm very open to ideas, whatever's going to help, really. So it's not, you know, we're not downing tools on this. So if there's any ideas as to how to make the app better, then yeah, very, very open to ideas for that.
I think Darius wants to focus on stability, so we put it into use and really sort of check it's all working properly.
The only other thing we are working on is some people don't want to sail with a phone on board. Is that my camera gone?
No.
Still there? Oh, okay. So this is a standalone Jeep waterproof GPS tracker. So I'm looking at having an option, someone who doesn't want to sail with their phone, to have one of these on board instead. So if someone's sailing, you know, kids sailing in a topper or a laser, parents probably don't want their phones on board. One of the things we're thinking about is equipping the cadets with these. So when they go missing on a race, and they're actually on the beach, the race officer can see where all the cadets are, stuck on a pontoon somewhere or whatever, as an extra safety feature, apart from the cadets getting some benefit from this as well. So that's still work in progress. The dedicated trackers aren't quite there yet. I've got another make on order. This one it's okay, but it's got some disadvantages. So there's another model that I'm going to be trying, but that's something we'll be looking to offer. They'll probably cost around 100 quid to have one of those as an alternative to using a phone. Won't be quite as good as a phone. It won't have the heel angle and the heading, and the.
Derek, I'm very tight on weight limit. Exactly how much does it weigh?
Less than a Mars bar.
Yeah, this will weigh less than your phone, Chris. So yeah, you can have one of these instead.
No, that's good. Good man. Good man. Yeah.
Just don't eat your normal pasty before the race, Chris.
Yeah, so
right, I've got to go, Darius. I just want to say thank you very much. It looks really good, and I can't wait to start playing with it.
Great, thanks.
Okay.